Right now at WARC, we're looking at how marketers can respond to the threat of recession. We want to bring you the evidence and the expertise you need to plan effectively. We've got a whole set of content on this topic coming out over the next few weeks, including a great new piece by David Carr, Director of Marketing Strategy and Analysis at Publicis Sapient. David looks at the implications of the current situation for e-commerce and direct-to-consumer. And I'm delighted to say we're joined by David today. David, thanks for joining us. I'd like to start by asking you if we're right to assume that the current situation should be good for e-commerce players.
I think the answer is that it depends. There's many different players out there. There's established pure plays. There's the more sort of fragile startup pure plays. There's omni-channel e-commerce. There's brands with selling within e-commerce, or brands with D2C and everything else like that. I think what we're seeing really is that this lockdown is not so much sort of changing everything as greatly accelerating trends that are already happening. Things that might take 10 years or so to happen are simply happening in months because of the situation we're in. US online grocery penetration has been really slow to grow, and it's already reached 9% this year, double what it was the start of this year. It could reach 12% by the end of this year. E-commerce as a whole might double its share of total retail. And obviously in non-essential categories, e-commerce is the only game in town. So for some businesses, it's a really great sort of situation. In others, it's diabolical. Some e-commerce players are being very aggressive. UK e-commerce sites have already doubled their ad spend. And particularly for the pure play e-commerce players out there, they're the ones that are already positioned to do well. What we're seeing is that idea of the Matthew principle play out. That idea for to him who has, more will be given, essentially. But with that, there runs the risk that some of the smaller businesses might collapse, or there might be more consolidation, or worse still, the sort of this Amazonification of everything will be complete, and we can only shop with Prime. Omnichannel e-commerce, particularly players, they've got also real challenges in this lockdown. Stores drive a hell of a lot of online traffic, and a ton of inventory of theirs is locked up in those closed stores. So again, even if they have the demand, they might not be able to meet it. But those that are going to do well, they're really about people, getting back to basics, focusing on the most viable and sustainable offerings in e-commerce, the core products, having a strong handle on overheads, good unit economics, knowing what their existing propositions are, and really have that ability to put the data behind where the business should invest. Those are probably the most successful ones in this lockdown.
And what new behaviours are you starting to see in the e-commerce space?
Well, we're seeing a lot more people obviously go online. We're seeing new people go online and discover either the world of sort of e-commerce and the virtual shelf, essentially. 2/3 of shoppers have sort of said that they're switched to purchasing products online that they've always previously purchased in store. And obviously that's not surprising. Stores are shut down, or they're hard to get into. But there's also evidence of willingness to try new services or ways of purchasing. China, 84% said they saw that they bought a new product or service when in lockdown. And if you think about it, most shopping occurs on autopilot. This disruption to routines and reevaluation, it creates opportunities. And one particular thing that we've seen that's particularly interesting for us was this idea of the traffic increasing to brand sites. We've seen a lot of traffic increasing to brand sites, own brand sites, increasing clicks on buy it now buttons. Normally people buy from the large or preferred retail partners, your Amazons or your Tesco's of this world, but they've been struggling to get on or get a delivery, and they've turned to brand sites. And so brand.coms, these owned assets have been growing in importance. Social's become a primary customer contact area, and so we think really in light of these sort of changing behaviours, brands should really start prioritising comprehensive answers to customer service, and really look at how they can own their own sort of real estate, essentially, and their own customers.
You talk in the piece about brands taking the opportunity to steal excess share of voice. Could you just flesh that out a little bit, please?
Yes. So essentially, the idea of excess share of voice or equilibrium share of voice is that if your share of voice is higher than your market share, then you grow. Essentially, you can grow your penetration. As competition, as other sort of businesses, other sort of media organizations have been cutting back spend on advertising and spend on customer acquisition, there's a real opportunity for brands to achieve this excess share of voice or equilibrium share of voice in e-commerce and really steal share. Obviously, for those brands faced with declining sales, reduced long-term customer value, customer acquisition spend can seem hard to justify, especially when you need to hold on to cash, but understandably. But we think it's really not the time to cut back on customer acquisition in e-commerce, because we are operating in unprecedented circumstances of mass store closures, social distancing. In previous recessions, a rule of thumb was that when stores closed, sales dispersed. 30% of sales generated would go to a closed store. In a closed store, would be still captured. Maybe 15% would move online, 50% would move to adjacent stores. But these aren't normal times, and so those adjacent stores, they're closed. If 30% of the closed store sales move online, then obviously e-commerce becomes vital to maintain those brands, keep those businesses ticking over, essentially, even if it's at a much lower volume, keeping it going for as long as possible until stores reopen.
Well, one of the big themes over the past couple of years, I guess, has been the rise of direct-to-consumer brands. What do you think the current situation means for them?
I think it's a big challenge for direct-to-consumer brands, because, to put it bluntly, the established players, they've got deeper pockets, they've got more resilience, they've got supply chain finance in some cases, to look after and maintain their supply chains. Whereas a lot of D2C brands that have outsourced that process, they're having massive supply chain disruptions and other challenges there. As you say, for the last few years, the story in e-commerce has been one of the changing dynamics, digitally native brands. I think there has been a lot of pressure recently on D2C before this recession, before COVID-19, on D2C brands to really be more profitable. The cheap VC money has been drying up. In this next few months, next year or so, this money could be turned off completely. And at the same time, people are retreating to the familiar brands, the trusted brands in CPG. And in this case, there's a lot of opportunity potentially with the bigger brands to use e-commerce to trial innovation, to win back share from the insurgents and maybe fulfill that D2C treat and discovery need state. That might be a really a key opportunity in e-commerce, especially as retailers are asking brands to narrow down and focus on just supplying the core of the core products to the still open stores in e-commerce. That creates a real maybe opportunity for D2C and for legacy brands as well, established brands, to focus on innovation in e-commerce.
Great. Thank you, David. Don't forget, you can read all of David's piece on WARC.com, and there's loads more coverage of marketing during the COVID-19 crisis and preparing for the upcoming recession. Just visit WARC.com and click on the link to the dedicated page. We'll be back soon with more like this, so stay tuned.